Good evening. Welcome to the 2020 Minnesota Northwoods Writers Conference Evening Reading Series. My name is Sean Hill, and I'm the conference director. This is our 8th conference, our first online. And this evening, we're about to hear the 6th and final reader of this week, Elizabeth Bradfield. It's been a great week. I'm awed by what the conference community, participants, faculty, interns, and staff, by what we accomplished in this space. I'm also a bit sad this evening. This week of readings has been inspiring for me, and I hate to see them come to an end. But I'm thrilled this evening because I get to hear Elizabeth Bradfield read her poems. And in my experience, that's always something quite special. We have gathered a small gallery to give Liz a sense of all of you gathered this evening. We will represent you well. Sarah Dennison, our conference administrator, and I will moderate the Q&A following the reading. Before we get started, there are a few people and entities I need to thank on behalf of the conference and myself. We want to thank the poets collected in the New Poets of Native Nations anthology and Hyde Erdrich, its editor, and Grey Wolf Press for their generous donation in support of the New Poets of Native Nations Women's Scholarship. We also want to thank an anonymous past Minnesota Northwoods Writers Conference participant for their generous donation in support of the Charles W. Scutcheon Emerging Writer of Color Scholarship, which we recently found out will be supported again next year. Yay. This conference is supported in part by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. So thank you, Minnesotans. And we want to thank Bemidji State University for its support and encouragement. We are grateful for our place in the Northwoods at Bemidji State University beside the lake known as Bemidji Gamog, where the river crosses, which has been the sacred gathering place for countless generations of indigenous peoples, including Dakota, Lakota, and Anishinaabeg, who remain the spiritual caretakers and thriving members of the greater community to which we all belong, situated as we are between 3 Ojibwe reservations, Leech Lake, White Earth, and Red Lake. We recognize and support the sovereignty of Native nations. We will continue to work with Indigenous teachers, elders, and youth to protect and honor all of our relationships with the land, all our relatives, and the truth. Elizabeth Bradfield is the author of 4 poetry collections, most recently Toward Antarctica, and the collaboration with artist Antonia Contro, titled Theorem. Her poems have appeared in numerous journals, including The New Yorker, The Atlantic Monthly, the most recent issue of the Atlantic Monthly, too, The Believer, Poetry, and Orion. Winner of the Audre Lorde Prize from the Publishing Triangle, finalist for the James Laughlin Award from the Academy of American Poets. Her awards also include a Stegner Fellowship and a residency at the Vermont Studio Center. For the past 20-some years, she has worked as a naturalist and guide on boats, both at home and in remote places around the world. In 2005, she founded Broadsided Press, an innovative, ekphrastic, public-spirited arts project which she continues to run. Check it out. Liz lives in Cape Cod with her partner and is associate professor and co-director of creative writing at Brandeis University. I met Liz way back in 2001 at the Bradfield Writers Conference, before either of us had books. But we didn't become friends until 2007 when we were both starting our Stegner Fellowships at Stanford University, and we both had our first books coming out in the spring. We ended up taking a lot of walks together and taking in the natural environment of Northern California. I think it's safe to say that we became dear friends. So I'm very, very glad to get to share her sharing her work with you tonight. It is with great pleasure I give you Elizabeth Bradfield.
Thank you, Sean. I'm getting all teary over here in the shed in the backyard. But yeah, Sean, you are one of my dear close poet friends, and it's such an honor to teach at your conference and work with these amazing people who come, some year after year, some for their first year, that will be year after year to this conference and to this gathering, and to join in this really amazing convocation of writers and thinkers and dreamers, I guess. All right, it's the last day of the conference, and I promise to make it short because I know all of you have been online a lot this past week. And I think just today, I actually received in the mail the advance copies for this collaboration that I've been working on with my artist friend, Antonia Contro. They've been sitting in the P.O. box for a while. I don't get home delivery, so we have to go to the post office to get our mail, which these days is a little bit more of an adventure than it usually is. So they just came today. I haven't opened them yet because I want to wait to look at them with my friend Antonia, who's in Chicago. But I thought that I would begin by sharing that collaboration with you, which began here on Cape Cod. Antonia is a dear friend who I've known for 10 years now, and we started thinking about collaborating together a long time ago, and nothing really came together until the summer of 2017 when she was out here on the Cape. She was a professional in the arts world. She ran an organization in Chicago called Marwin. And so she had this full professional life and would steal this time in the summer for her practicing life as an artist, which she also kept alive, which I so admire in her. Anyone who has a full career and also a full life as an artist, it's amazing to keep both of those things going. So in 2017, she suggested that we collaborate on a project springing from a collection of images, a folio of images that she had put together for another project. And I was nervous. I was so nervous because it's a big responsibility. And but I took those images and I sat with them for a while. She went home. I tried to just forget about everything and come to those images freshly, not with her voice or our conversations in mind, but to really approach them in the freshest way that I could. And then over the course of a couple of years, we worked together on this book titled Theorem, switching some images out, talking back and forth about the words that were there, and it's a genuine collaboration. And it's quite sparse in many ways, so I want to share it with you tonight in its entirety. And to do that, I'm going to show you her images. And in the book, which first was released last year as a fine art book through Candor Arts, a beautiful publisher in Chicago, the words and images are not on facing pages. Neither is an illustration of the other or a caption for the other. They really are holding their own space and time. So you have an image, then you turn the page. You have some text, then you turn the page. And you're meant to kind of go back and forth and think about these relationships together. So I put together a PowerPoint that tries to approximate that experience of being in the book and in those words. And you'll see the format will be, there'll be an image, and then there'll be a darkened page or screen, but there'll be a little ghosting of text on that screen because this book is very, very sparse. The words are arranged graphically on the page, not in the shape of a bunny, but they're using the space of the space of the page deliberately. And I just want to whisper toward that in what I'm able to share with you tonight. And yeah, I'll be very curious to hear what your questions are later. So I'm going to start the screen sharing, and it'll be slightly awkward, but I don't think too bad. But this is theorem. At 13, I fell in love with the tidy solutions of geometry. Neat in my notebooks, they made architecture of chaos, denoted all I could not allow myself to say, contained it in measurable forms. Yet something pulsed. Formulas and proofs were fingers caged around a bright, quick thing, trapped but not bruised, not even close, but bruisable, a sort of bird. This is a story of secrets, of a secret, of becoming from and alongside them. What could allow me to approach myself, my secrets, safely? Even now, they have power. As for one, something had begun to flow through my body's passages. If I opened my hands, what would be revealed? I knew. Dark matter, strange attractions, an unknown universe. Was it safe? I didn't know, but stars shone there. I sensed them, and they were not tired, told fate, but projected escape. Math made map, a sky blanketing that could open and open to the breathless unheld. There were 5 of us, plus the dog and the dog that died, no others. I was one of 3 sisters. For so long, I didn't know what shape I was. Did I have to have one? I learned the horizon's distance can be calculated by your height above sea level. The oldest, first to emerge, I was looking at a different distance than my sisters, or the same view differently. I know, so were they. I did not know what, aside from me, was precarious. But physics tells us that once in motion, even the smallest things, given length of run and type of terrain, can carve huge swaths. We grew into other complications, more complex math. Our mother kept track of us on a tug company calendar hung inside the ironing board cupboard. Each boxed day was marked with the tide's sine curve, predictable flood and ebb rising and falling across the weeks. But don't forget, all of this was created by the moon. To cube is to find the 3 of x. It is to leave the planar, the plane, thus permitting shadow. Our edges touched, our stories abutted, the same light struck us at different times. Something was on approach from elsewhere. I was known as a secretive child, not at first, but later, maybe starting then. I could not find what was growing in me within any of the books on the shelves of our house. There was no guide available. I could not identify either what was growing in my sisters alongside me, or how, or why, or into what. Photomorphs, we grew differently, even as our roots all pulled from the same soil. We lived on the wet side of Western mountains, yet I don't really remember rain. I was very good at forgetting. I still am. I grappled with rum lines, arced routes that took longer on the map, but my dad said actually take less time to travel. The math worked, but storms still howled out of who knows where, shifting the courses of even huge ships. How were my sisters navigating? I didn't think to wonder. No flat map shows the world's true shape. We mislearn extremities and peripheries from the start. What else have I erased? How can I know? This is the only way I can write about it. The only way I will. I promise. One secret has stepped into light, has long glowed luminous. How ridiculous now its early, confused fear. The other is not mine to tell. A dark, dense absence, a singularity. I can only measure what it has bent, the adjustments made to avoid its pull. It ghosts me. Is there a truth it holds? Too close for any perspective or clarity. How can I know? Look, I can pretend to see things two ways, but the gut is singular and stubborn. It knows what it first knew as true. There's one form, one story, one vessel I keep seeing. And really, it is two stories, two cubed, unfolding at once, recombinant, flowing into and through each other, forming a unique amalgam. There were 5 of us, and a dog, only one dog at a time, no one else. The results are fractal. The trajectories radiate. Something happened to me, and yet not to me. It divides, absolutely. What was created in its chaos, light, dust, shadow, for me, for my sisters, for us all. I am still trying to map it. I am still trying to calculate what can be traced to its red-shifted source. That is the entirety of theorem. Which I think is, it is a book about secrets, and it is a book about childhood and trying to grapple to use the language of science, of math, to understand things that are beyond our comprehension. And I think that grappling and that trying to come at something and come at something again and understand something and try another way of understanding something, for me, has resonance in this moment, for so many things that are happening in the world. So I wanted to share that with you tonight. And then I thought I would share, depending on time, share some newer poems. I'm tempted to read from Toward Antarctica, which is the most recent book that is out in the world now. But the energy and the direction of that book is so very different than Theorem. It's a very embodied, present, driving book in many ways. And there's so much drift to Theorem. It's kind of hard to go from one to the other. So I thought I might read some kind of loose, newer poems that are not collected, that seem to be moving toward something in and of themselves. And then we'll see what happens. But I love responding to work by visual artists. The one of the reasons that I started Broadsided Press is that I love what artists can do, what visual art can do. And I just find it amazing. And I was very lucky to have Sean on board at Broadsided as an editor for several years. And what happens there is that people send in poems and we read the poems and we think, all right, will this be something we want to publish? And if it is, then we send that poem out to a pool of artists who have agreed to work with the project. And one of them says, I want to make work in response to that poem. That poem inspires me. I want to do something. And then we put them together as a single sheet of paper, as a single broadside that we publish in a way that any of you can easily grab. We publish them as PDFs to be printed on a home printer, regular letter-sized paper. And our goal at Broadsided is to have you take those and put them out where you think they belong, in your communities, in bathroom stalls, on, under the windshield wipers of cars in the supermarket, wherever you think they ought to go. But that energy between text and image, between literary art and visual art, is something that I keep reapproaching, and I find myself engaging in more and more often and in different ways. In Toward Antarctica, I use a lot of photographs there to serve as part of the conversation of that book, of trying to understand what it means to travel to a place like Antarctica for work as a naturalist, to a place that I dreamed of for so very long. And this is a roundabout way of me getting around to the next poem I'm going to read, which is a poem titled Permeable. And this poem was inspired by I guess I want to say a sculpture, although it was semi two-dimensional, by an artist named Leah Wong, who I don't know, but had work up at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown a few summers ago when I was teaching there. And her work is this cut paper. There's a lot of open space. And I've been thinking water has become a big theme in the poems that I've been writing lately. The importance of water, my work as a naturalist on the water, the fascination I have with marine creatures and worlds. And where I live on Cape Cod, we're a big old sandbar. If you want to hit any rock, you've got to go down 400 feet through the sand. And that means, surrounded as we are on all sides by sea and ocean, we're totally permeated by that saltwater environment, right? There's no rock. It is all sand. We do have a tiny little water table that kind of floats on top of that permeated sand. Fresh water is less dense than salt water. So if you have fresh and salt together, the fresh water will rise to the top of the salt water. So we have this thin little slice of an aquifer here that's all rain fed. There are no springs. And I was just thinking about that vulnerability. I was thinking about water. I was thinking about the ponds here on the Cape, the kettle ponds, which are really just exposed water table. So when we go swimming in these ponds, we're swimming in our drinking water, and all of that water kind of flows, and how, all that stuff is coming down from the sky into that water. It's going into our bodies in that water. There are lead fishing weights in that water. I was just thinking about all of those vulnerabilities. So this is a poem titled Permeable, after Leah Wong. Below us, water, fresh lens, and below that, a different water, salt-soused. This youngest end of the glacier spat spit, this outwash plain, grains permeable, percolating, angular, rough, tilted, piled, and drifted into dunes, swales, space between the plains, slip and seep. How does it hold? How are we held as we bustle, as we duck whatever current licks at us? A comfort to river my own salt through a pond, which is an open eye of the water body aquifer. A well sucks from under backyard sand. Pull too deep and you'll draw salt. We float, placid, though not untouched by what falls heavy from seeming clear sky into nymph body, fish body, or what fins up from salt depth, toothed, or riptides. Diver lost this summer and the body held 2 days before washed ashore. Sorrow, I have felt you seeping as the pond's larger body seeps, flows slow, finally rivers out a few feet below mean high tide into larger water. You've seen those small rivers, underworld cool, vein-like and branching into our porous, dangerous world. I do work as a naturalist on boats here on Cape Cod. I've done that for the past 20 some years. I feel really lucky to have had this kind of continual relationship with the offshore beings of this place. There are whales that I've been seeing for the past 25 years. I recognize them individually. They're easy to recognize. It's not a special skill. A lot of people can do this. But knowing those whales, it becomes part of your understanding of the world, a way of marking time in your own life. And whales don't live forever. They live a long time. And last year, a fin whale, Balænoptera physalis, the second largest animal on the planet, only the blue whale is larger. They're around Cape Cod all year. They move in and out of these waters. And one fin whale in particular, a fin whale that we named the whales, Ladders. He was named for the scars on his flank. He was struck by a boat. The propeller scarred him up a little. He lived for decades after that. It was not a life-threatening wound, but he did die last year and washed up on the beach. And I was thinking about Ladders, this fin whale. So here's the poem. When one known to you dies, the rearranging of space and time begins, for Ladders. A rib, I know whose, in the harbor under waves. How heavy would it be, hefted? Low tide will bear it, will allow pickers to take it, make it decor. Whalebone with tulips, leaching minerals, oil, the perennials stronger for it. Up the beach, the rest of him, unscattered and held still by sinew, flesh, spine and ribs, but no longer the jaw, which when he first washed up ashore was flayed by flensers and sun, proved to be broken. We knew him, this fin whale, Ladders. I can't remember the year, the moment of my first sighting or resighting of his stuttered prop scar, long-heeled, an easy marker. Who was I then? Young and newly arrived, sorrows vast and losses, it must be said, negligible. What does his rib carve now? That space filled by water, that emptiness, and knowledge of what it once held. For a lot of years, I had some poems about my dad in my first book and my second book. And my mom was like, when are you going to write a poem about me? I was like, oh gosh, Mom, I don't know. I tried, I couldn't, it didn't happen. And then finally, a few years ago, the right moment presented itself. I was reading poems by Bob Hickok. I was thinking a lot about the lyric I and how we mark or don't mark ourselves. When do we say, hi, I'm a middle-aged white lesbian lady? And when do we just kind of let those emotions drift without anchoring them to a social body? And I was also thinking about different relationships to the ocean, to saltwater. I had read Araceli Jamé's book, The Black Maria, and which is about the Eritrean diaspora and talking about the Middle Passage and her relationship to ocean water, which is very different than mine. And I wanted to engage those ideas and selves, and borrowed a poem by Bob Hickok titled Learning to Swim. And I think that's all you need to know. Learning to swim. Now 45, this was a while ago. Now 45, having outlasted some of myself, I must reflect. What if I hadn't been held by my mom in the YWCA basement pool, her white hands slick under my almost toddler armpits, her thumbs and fingers firm around my ribs, which is to say lungs, held gently as a liverwurst sandwich and pulled kindly under. What if I hadn't been taught to trust water might safely erase me, those years I longed to erase, or at least abandon care of my disoriented, disdained body? I might have drowned instead of just ebbed, never slid from given embankments into this other natural course. Drift and abundance in what she offered, the wider, indifferent ocean of trade and dark passage not yet mine to reckon. And so now, sharp tang of other waters known, I am afloat, skin chilled, core warm, aware of what lurks and grateful to trust and delight in our improbable buoyancy. Let's see, where are we for time? We got some time. This is another poem that was inspired by an artist's image of a friend of mine in Provincetown, Barbara Cohen. She's a painter, and she had been going to Greece, to Lesbos, and working with refugees there and painting. And she had a show come together that was showing some of those images, and she asked me if I might write something. And it never kind of went out into the world, but I wrote this, and I want to share it partly for my workshop participants, because we were talking about the difficulties of engaging with an immediate political difficult moment, and how do we make that leap to engage, and how do we do that in a way that doesn't feel, I don't know, exploitative or easy or untethered from our own lives. And I don't know if this poem is successful or not, so I'm going to share it with you anyway, just in the spirit of having tried to do that. So it's a poem titled After Image, after Barbara Cohen, after Lesbos. A mound of jackets, 10 acres, one article says. Orange stuffed, zipped, buckled, and tied, then cast off, piled on shore. Once, when I was small, maybe 7, which means my little sister would have been 4, or maybe we were 6 and 3. Either way, she was young enough for me to think I should think for her. We were in a small boat coming home from an island. Summer, dark, choppy, cold. I wasn't frightened. Can a memory deep in my body's darkness connect us? We were small, but I felt big. My sister sometimes got sick in the boat, then dove into a sleep that carried her elsewhere. She and I faced the stern. Our parents, driving, looked ahead into the dark water for logs. A running light tailed us like an obstinate star. Did those boats have lights? My sister's head jounced across the musty orange of her May West, loud outboard, loud thwacks of the hull. We steered for home by shore lights we knew, route wrote as walk to the neighborhood store. All my knowledge of water does not know their water. I could see my sister was cold. Proud of noticing, I took some towels and knotted them tight around her legs and arms. She slept on. My mother turned to check on us. And this is it, I now see, not my memory, but my memory of my mother. She turned and saw not kind care, but some story from the old myths looming up behind her. A log struck, her youngest flung out, bound, unable to kick against cold water, and so drowned by her oldest. No matter at that moment what we moved from or toward, only the sea's dark indifference all around our pliant bodies, the dangers we create and the ways we ward against. I will never forget the terror of her fury. Such luck in what is left behind, abandoned and untested. So I guess we're going to leave water a little bit, but not exactly. This is a poem. I suppose I could say we're in the poems that are responsive to this moment. This is a poem titled "Dispatch from This Summer," and 4 years ago, after the Pulse shooting in Orlando, I was more devastated than I anticipated that I would be. It felt so personal to me. Despite never having been to that dance club, despite hardly actually being a person who goes to a lot of dance clubs or even did when I was younger, but the violence of that and the hatred of that shooting, it really struck me. And that same summer, I was here on Cape Cod, and we were having an outbreak of gypsy moths, which I actually just learned this week. Research into how to get rid of gypsy moths are one of the things that led Rachel Carson into writing Silent Spring. That didn't make it into this poem, but now I know that, and I wish it had. But the gypsy moths were, they were everywhere. They were eating everything. It was really intense. And I was thinking about these two things. The Latin name for gypsy moth is Lymantria dispar. And I think the only other thing I need to tell you is that frass is, and this is one to write down, it's what you call insect poop, frass, which is such a great word. You got to have that in your back pocket. All right, dispatch from this summer, Lymantria dispar. Frayed, moth-eaten, vulnerable, those Florida dancers gunned down, and my young self coming out dancing, and pathetic fallacy, dispar, crawls all over June's fresh oaks, gnawing them to a February canopy. The news, bad oracle, gnaws fact and rumor. Above, unrelenting mastication, defoliation. Lymantria, destroyer. All else gone, you hump up even the stiff needles of pines. What will happen come winter, no sun stored? Should we spray? Should we shun social media, avoid large aggregations? How hot the birds must be, unshaded in their nests, guilty thrill of peering down on them, black-billed cuckoos calling. Other wings, the white towering stagecraft of angels sentry at Orlando's morning. We consider what it would take to pick the trees clean. Could we? The bark, the grass, the ground writhes. In a grove in China, a grim documentary. Honeybees gone, people pollinate fruit trees by hand. I twitch away from one caterpillar dangling from its thread, hanging by the silk that brought it here, to the New World, to Massachusetts even, because some merchant in 1869, while Grant took the presidency and Elizabeth Cady Stanton spoke before Congress, and the golden spike was hammered into Utah, and the South fumbled through what's called Reconstruction, thought crop, harvest, riches, and hoped the long, expensive trek to Mulberry unnecessary. We gnaw through news feeds. We post and share, unsure if we are offering or consuming. In the forest, a constant heavy frass. On my side of the river, healthy trees, oak leaves thick and dark. In the dance clubs near me, there is dancing, but introduction, dispersal. In the week after Pulse, in Massachusetts, 450% more guns like that gun were sold. If you can stand to walk a narrow path through the leafless forest, you can arrive at a circle of water that will allow your body to be beautifully held, whoever you are. It's true, you'll have to return by the same path, go back through those apocalyptic trees. If I had waited a month to begin this poem, I would have begun with the reliefing, fuzzed red growth in late July, moth flutter among the trunks, not angelic, but like paper corners that didn't get burned in someone's attempted or accidental fire. Is it too late? Now, plastered to bark, the russet humps of eggs that I scrape with a stick, vengeful, hopeful, despairing, even as they are being laid. I'm gonna end giving us some time for questions with this new poem written from the pandemic, my pandemic poem. This January, I had been feeling really disconnected from my writing, kind of stuck and annoyed and frustrated. And so I told myself that for January, I would write one bad poem every day. And so I did. I wrote so many bad poems. I wrote one bad poem every day. And that kind of continued into February, into March, and actually through April. I'm not doing one a day anymore. It's too much. But as COVID started emerging and spreading throughout the United States, of course, that entered into these poems. And in March, I started the poem that I'm going to read now, which is the one in the Atlantic that Sean mentioned, that's titled Touchy. And in the poem, I mention, in the Atlantic version, it says Kunitz, but in my Heart version, I don't say Kunitz, I say Stanley, because this is Stanley Kunitz, the amazing poet who lived in Provincetown and New York and wrote the beautiful poem Touch Me, which begins, "Summer is late, my heart, words pulled out of the dark some 40 years ago." It's such a beautiful poem. You should all read that poem. But I'm going to read this poem titled Touchy. Touchy, we say, when someone's sensitive. So touchy, so dangerous, delicate, and ready to tip. Touching, though, is sweet. And we are touched by the gift, the thought, moved into knowledge of care, if not love. Touched, too, means crazy, God-kissed, the brain lit otherwise. I hope we've all known someone who has got the touch, able to ease a knot, make any machine hum true, tune a string. And touch me, says Stanley, in the poem that always chokes me up, as if the hand of a wife would bring me back to myself, or to the selves we both once were. Don't touch. First warning, the stove, the open sockets shock, the body unknown to you and all the bodies it, in turn, has willfully or not allowed such intimacy. When I first felt yearning for the skin I always keep hidden to touch another's hidden skin, it was the early decade of a different, terrible virus. The danger was known and unknown both, and, in some small way, the risk of infection not unlike the risk of intimacy. In touch, when we know how someone is faring. Touch and go, when we're not sure how things will turn out.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so very much. gallery, please unmute yourselves and let the applause be heard.
Woo! Beautiful.
Lovely.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, please place your questions in the Q&A. And gallery, if you have a question, you can jump in now.
I'm going to go to the Great Hollywood Squares version of looking at all of you. Oh, good. Yeah, there you are.
Yeah, here we are.
I'll ask a question. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Liz, I'm really interested in the theorem project, and those images are so abstracted and strange and sort of sciencey. A little physics, a little biology, if you stretch your brain a little, and geometry. And the poems are so different from most of the poems of yours that I know. There's so much air and space in them. I'd just be super interested in what your process was of going from her images to those poems.
Yeah, and I kind of see it as one long poem, you know, really spread out versus singular poems. It feels like a singular narrative to me. And Antonia's images are so spare, right? They're very controlled. The lines are very delicate. And I once had an editor tell me, I mean, I love him to death. And he's like, Liz, you're not afraid of using up the page. You're not afraid of filling up the page. You know, I am not a spare writer by inclination, but there's something about being in collaboration with visual art. I want that art to hold its space and the words to hold their space. And when the two are operating together, I want there to be a lot of air around those words so that the art can speak also. I don't want to over talk it. And so that led me, and Antonia's images really led me into exploring a secret that I don't share with you what the secret is, that is something I've held for a long time and have never wanted to write about or found the right way of writing about. And I was so grateful to, I guess, the distance that her images gave me and the permission that they gave me, because they were telling their own story. So I could kind of do something on the side and not bear the whole burden of explanation. I think one of the things I love about looking at visual art is that definitely the artist has a perspective and they have a vision that they want to share, sometimes a story, sometimes not, but there's a lot of room for us chitty chatty verbal people to engage story-wise, like we saw with Scott's reading the other night, and Mira's images too, in some ways, not in some ways, in every way. They gave me a permission to not say so much and to allude a lot more. And that was really interesting. I didn't expect that necessarily.
I have a follow-up question to ask with that. It's about the arc of the narrative. You knew the secret and the process of holding it, right? So that narrative was known. Did you find that you patterned, so I'm thinking of the sequence of the poems and thinking of the sequence of the images, did you find that you kind of had an arc of the narrative in mind and then place the images accordingly? Or did you go with the image first? I have that kind of order question for you.
Yeah, so the images that Antonia shared with me were bound in a book. She works in notebooks, and she pulled some of her notebook pages out. And one of the reasons that the images I was showing get smaller and smaller is because physically they actually do get smaller and smaller. And in the fine art version, the pages get smaller and smaller in the book in these sections. And so they were bound together in a sequence. And I responded to them in that way. The first image of what she gave me actually is not in the book anymore, but it started me. You know, it began this poem, and I was like, oh, all right, I guess I'm gonna go there. And then the images triggered different ways of engaging and continuing the narrative. So at first I was following her images. But then when we came back together and when I showed her what I had written, I was like, well, this image it doesn't work anymore now that there's this story. We maybe need a little more space here, a little bit more time here. Is there another image we can put in here? This one is too funny. There's a funny image. I was like, I can't, it's not a funny thing. So I was totally guided by that first presentation of the images that she gave me. And also by the fact that those pages got smaller and smaller. That idea of winnowing down was really influential to me in engaging with those. And then we had a lot of conversations about what to do, what to keep, what to pull, what to move around a little bit. But we both created these kind of, I guess, standalone things from the beginning. Does that answer your question? Okay. Elle, yeah, I saw you had a.
Thank you so much. Just beautiful, beautiful. My brain is buzzing. Thank you for sharing. My question, I'm really curious about this daily writing that you were mentioning that you're doing from January through the end of March, particularly as in March when we were finding out more about our present situation. And so I wondered if you could share kind of what you learned from that consistent daily practice and how that may have guided you to write through March when there were so many unanswered questions. There's so many writers I hear now who are trying to give themselves permission to not write because of being overwhelmed. So yeah, I wondered if you could talk more about that process early on and how that helped you approach March.
Well, I think telling myself I was going to write a bad poem every day was super helpful, right? Just write a bad poem. It doesn't, whatever. One of them might not be being good. This is the notebook. My, let's see, January 2nd through, April 29th. Every day, something bad. And I had a couple of things in mind. I mean, there is a collection of poems that I've been working on for way too long. Some of the poems I wrote 10 years ago, and I still haven't finished this, what I think will be a collection of poems. And I had an idea that I might want to play. I had a little bit of a framework, right? I was like, all right, this is one of the things that I want to write about, is to take these words and look into their etymology and to examine words for parts of a boat that, back to the water, that I know and use, and that were known and used 100 years ago by this polar explorer that I'm kind of writing with, I suppose I should say. And so that helped me a lot, because I just had a list of words. I'm like, oh, today I'm going to write about binnacle, and today will be scupper, and how about cleat, and what happens if you do that, and bad poem. But then, because I was writing every day, just random things could come in. So that, for me, always that balance of a little bit of structure and a little bit of freedom is really helpful. Assignments, and then just allowing things to kind of sneak in on the periphery was really helpful. And, March, in a weird way, March was hard, but not as hard as June. Like the now of June in so many ways, of the protests that are going on and doing such good work, of police brutality and how do we change those systems, of people forgetting that there's a pandemic. And I live in a tourist town, people coming here to visit and not being safe. So now, to me, I just feel like, I don't know what to do now. So I'm grateful that I wrote up through that time, because now I can just go back and here's my low stakes entry, is like, oh, type something. How about if you type something up and then see what happens, And so I think having those, giving yourself some low barrier to entry ways to come into writing, for me, is really, really helpful. Because if I wait too long or stay apart too long, it gets scarier and scarier to re-engage,
There's a question in the Q&A, Deborah Rasmussen. You use the words trying to understand in reference to your work in theorem. I sense that too in your work in Toward Antarctica. Do you find that your poetry or others' poetry can or should arrive at understanding? Or is it always about the journey?
for me, writing the poem is about the journey, but I do discover on that journey. You know what I mean? We talked about this a little bit in workshop, and it's going to be probably old news to everybody here, but that old adage, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. As I write, and whether it's an image that I didn't realize is in association with the subject that I'm engaging with, or a past memory that connects, or a news item that connects, that discovery of connection is something that I love most of all about writing. And it is, for me, writing is an act of sense making. And I might not make sense of stuff. I might not come to a great conclusion at the end. I might still be a little mystified by a situation or an emotion, but I've created something where I can grapple with it. I can look at it. I can say that I've thought about it and maybe reapproach it again, or understand the shape of its mystery better, even if I don't understand the solution to the mystery. I think that's my answer.
There's another question in the Q&A that's asking, have you published anything about writing poetry? Will you?
Is that an assignment? I've only published one essay about writing, and it was an essay that was anthologized in a great anthology of poets writing about places. It's called The Poems Country. Poetry is place and poetic, or something like that. And I wrote about the ocean as a poetic, and that holds a lot of poems in it, ideas about poetry. It doesn't talk a lot about process. I keep having these ideas of articles I should write about poetry, and then I just never write them because I'd rather write the poems, and also as a writer, the not knowing of how it happens is more interesting to me than the presentation of any kind of authority. So I would feel like a big faker. I can present some ideas, but it's just not really where my heart is. I mean, my heart is in those making of those poems, the questioning. I do write essays, but they're not often essays about the writing process. Maybe that'll burble up one of these days, but I don't know. There's a lot of great writers out there who are really good about talking about writing and process. I mean, Mary Ruffel, Toni Morrison. I mean, there's just so many great books out there on writing and on process, and I'm going to read those. Ellen Bryant Voigt, Jane Hirschfield. There's so much great writing out there.
Emily, I think your hand was up.
I just had a quick question. When you mentioned that as you're writing, you get ideas of like past memories or news or things that have happened around the world, just curious, like, do you include them into that poem, or what do you do with them? Do you save them for later?
I like to put them in there. Why not? See what happens. It's really delightful to me when disparate things start to have connection to one another, and discovering connection to one another. Like in that Gypsy Moth poem, the Dispatch from This Summer. Oh my God, when I was feeling all of that about Pulse, and I was feeling all that about the Gypsy Moths, and I was like, what is the history of the Gypsy Moth? How did they get here? And discovering that someone brought them here for commercial use to the state that I live in, and thinking about what else was going on in US history at the time they were introduced, and what that means, and what those legacies are, and the legacy of those moths, and the legacy of homophobia. Yeah, I want it all in there because it's all part of it, so bring it in, and then maybe toss it all out and just focus on the one thing.
Do you ever get concerned that it makes it too long then?
Well, I love reading a book of poems that has both short and long poems. I love that kind of expansion and contraction. I love the billows of that. I love a short, crafted, resonant poem. And I also love a long and wandering poem. So too long, what's too long? I mean, Omeros is like 400 pages. The Folding Cliffs is 400 pages. I don't get bored in those books. Those are epic poems. Homer too, right? So I don't know what too long is. It's only too long for that poem. Can that poem sustain the attention, the energy, the interest, and how do you do that? I don't favor long or short over one another though necessarily. It's just that, whatever that is that you're trying to do.
There's a question in the Q&A, just ask it. Did the Atlantic actually ask to change Stanley to Kunitz in your poem?
They did. And I did it. I was like, yes, Atlantic Monthly. I will. yes, I will do that. But I think I'm going to change it back if it goes into a book because Stanley, come on, it's such a nice name. It's so tender. And the back and forth process. When I've been very, very lucky to have had poems in the New Yorker and in the Atlantic Monthly, and their fact-checking process. It's something you don't get at regular literary magazines. The fact checkers come in and the grammarians, and they want to make sure you can justify all of those weird poetry choices that you made. And it's fantastic. It's so cool. And then if you say, yeah, no, I really meant to do that. I really wanted to do that. In the Atlantic Monthly poem, I had some ampersands in the poem instead of the word and that was not going to fly with them. I was like, all right, but I'm going to put them back in because I really like the ampersands in that poem. So yeah.
Mira has a question.
Thank you, Liz. This was just amazing. It was really, really beautiful to hear you read there and see the images all together. Before our craft talk, when we were talking, you were saying about doing more paired poems and multiple iterations of trying to get at one idea, which really fascinates me because I feel like I just struggle so much to just get like one thing about one idea. And I love the idea and your patience. And I wanted to just hear more about your drive about what is that process like? What makes you decide that to take that process for certain ideas versus other? I'd love to hear more. Yeah.
Well, first, you do that with your long form and short form, but bypassing that back into to answering your question. In this new book that I started writing 10 years ago and probably won't finish for 10 more years, I do have these poems that I'm thinking of as mirror poems. And it partly came out of my own frustration with myself. I mean, my inclination as a poet is to write a narrative poem that is very, very clear and direct. I don't want to write poems that make someone feel like they need a secret decoder ring or make them feel like they're not smart enough to get the poem. That is an anathema to me. But at the same time, sometimes those really direct narrative poems feel like they're getting a little boring. And so I was thinking, well, okay, so what if I write the narrative poem to engage with this moment and describe it and look at it and find a way to bring it into relationship with language and image? And then what if on the next page, I let myself go a little crazy and explore around and be a little bit more drifty and trust that what came before will be kind of the explanatory note for the poem that follows. And that was really fun. And then I went and did a third, and I would have an erasure, not an erasure poem, but a poem that pulls a lot of found text out of articles and has brief little responses as well. And just thinking about different ways to engage a historic moment, an idea, a question, and not privileging one over the other, but allowing those different things to be and not trying to find the middle ground, but allowing myself to be exaggerated in any of those approaches was really freeing for me. And I yeah, it's been really interesting, and I hope I can do more of them. For a while, I was kind of on a roll, and then I got a little self-conscious, and I got a little stuck. So we'll see if I can trick myself into being a novice again.
Nice. You should just write bad ones. That'll let you off the hook.
Bad, bad poems.
If you can, I kind of suspect maybe you can't. But
I can write the worst poems.
There's another question in the Q&A. As a creative writing professor, how has working with students affected your writing, if you think it has?
It's really inspiring. I mean, I work at Brandeis where I teach. We only have undergraduates in our creative writing classes. So there's a lot of people just starting out on their journeys, or just dabbling for a little bit, or taking something last ditch effort I always wanted to try, and now I'm about to graduate and I better do it now. And that energy and enthusiasm and excitement it's really a delight. And it keeps me reading, and it keeps me asking, and man, the trust and the sense of wonder, especially for these students, who many of which are traditional students, right out of high school into college, who are for the first time out away from where they grew up, and grappling with things, and maybe starting to consider themselves as serious writers. I mean, it's such a tender and vulnerable time, and being able to be part of that process for them is, I mean, it's a real honor. It's quite humbling, and it's really inspiring to see them do that work. And then I will also say that I really love in the summer stepping away from my teacherly self, except for right now, because I start to get a little self-conscious. I start to think about how I'm being seen and how I'm presenting stuff, and what will they think about this thing that I'm writing. And it's for my creative health and just for my general health to step away from that and, go drive a boat, or just go walk around and swim, and I don't know, do my naturalist thing is really a solace, and pulls me away from being a little bit overly self-conscious, or maybe a little bit precious about poetry-ness, which, I don't know, I have an uneasy relationship to as a public figure. As a personal thing, I love it. I love it. I love it. But Scott has talked about modesty, and I have a little bit of that shyness about putting myself forward as a visible figure. I feel very uncomfortable about it. So it's a huge solace to step away from that teaching self and that self-consciousness.
Thank you, Liz. Are there any more questions from the gallery or the audience? Okay.
Well, let me say what a privilege it's been to teach here this week, even online. And Sean, you said so many beautiful things at the end of the publishing panel. And thank you for inviting me to teach here. And thank you to my workshop, who brought such brave poems and such generosity to the room, the Zoom room. It's really been wonderful. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. Gallery, please unmute yourselves. Give Liz one more round of applause.
Yeah.
You. And conference attendees, this community, I want to thank you again for an incredible week. And I want to thank the audience for coming tonight, this evening, to this reading. Please join us again next year. Have a good night.